Hi everyone, Anthony Fantano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of the new Zammuto record, Anchor. Zammuto is the musical project of singer-songwriter and musical sonic tinkerer Nick Zammuto, formerly known as being one half of the experimental music duo The Books. The Books. To me, a very important musical project that fused together elements of folk music, singer-songwriter music, rock, electronics, as well as a very eclectic array of vocal samples across their discography. Their final LP before they disbanded, The Way Out, is easily one of my favorite records in their discography, and this is their debut album as well, which is great too. Now, before disbanding The Books, Nick Zammuto had put out music under the Zammuto name before, but once The Books were kaput, he came back under this name, but kind of reformed Zammuto as sort of being like a full band as opposed to just a small-scale musical project that featured just a lot of ambient tracks, a lot of experimental tracks. And this self-titled record that Zammuto returned with was a pretty nice, straightforward LP. It wasn't quite as difficult or as experimental as The Books' previous album, but I still think Nick lived up to his pretty adventurous reputation, fusing together elements of acoustic and electronic music, along with rock. And for all of his odd musical quirks, Nick was usually pretty good at bringing things back down to earth and coming together with a pretty coherent, enjoyable song, with a bit of a pop appeal. Now, with this new and sort of sophomore record, right here, Anchor, there are two things that are pretty apparent. The imagery that comes together with a record titled Anchor, something that holds you in place, keeps you grounded, and Nick is definitely doing that on here, on this sequel album, where he isn't really wandering too far outside of the sound profile that he introduced on his previous record. And my first impression of this album cover and the first track off of this record itself is that this is kind of a winter album. It is slow, it is frosty, it's sort of quiet, it's serene. It really kind of feels like just the stillness that you feel when you go outside, when you get that first huge winter blizzard and the very next morning you're going out and everything just seems totally frozen and quiet. This opener that I'm talking about is titled Good Graces, and on this song we're getting Nick's typically very young, boyish voice singing very gently over these very serene synthscapes. There's a very icy sheen on these tracks, some very brooding electric piano and bass come in later down the line, and a lot of tracks here follow suit in this mood. This album is definitely a mood change, and in a pretty big way. There's the song Henry Lee, which is sort of a take on a traditional track that features a lot of very airy, ethereal blizzards of synth arpeggios swirling around Nick's voice. And then there's tracks on here like The Great Equator, which are a little more lively in the second half. Musically, for the first half, it's a bit of a slow thaw, but then Nick introduces a bunch of glitchy, off-kilter, sort of sporadic synthesizer melodies that really heat the track up. This record for sure relies much more on subtlety and melody in comparison with the last Zammuto album, and it's not a road I'm really sure I'm crazy to hear Nick Zammuto move down, because I'm not hearing a whole lot of finesse on this record, in my opinion. Not a whole lot of fluidity. Instead, I'm hearing a lot of beats and a lot of synth sequences that feel just so lock in step and methodically put together, and I don't mind this characteristic of Zammuto's music. It's what really attracted me to his last full-length LP, but I'm not really sure it translates to the slow-burning beauty I feel like he's trying to conjure on this latest LP of his, fully anyway. It does a little bit on some tracks. I definitely love the song Stinker, one of the best tracks off this entire LP and one of the quietest too. Has these beautiful waves of synthesizers just coming again and again and again. They have a nice sheen on them. And Nick's voice in these waves of synths sounds really broken, dreary, just, oh, there's just a really painful emotion that's just so palpable on this track, it's difficult to describe. But for every patient and vast song that is on this record that I enjoy, there's another that really doesn't do much to move me emotionally. Really sort of blobby, faint, and listless tracks like Stop Counting. And there are some other tracks on here that I find to be engaging too, but they have somewhat abrupt endings that kind of kill the song just a tad for me. The track Need Some Sun, which may also play into the winter theme of this album, the song Hegemony, as well as the track I.O., which is one of the album's just poppiest and most upbeat tracks. It's got an awesome melody. I love the bwah, bwah synth tones on this track, the really crunchy drums. This track sounds like a new wave song with an engineering degree from MIT. To me, overall, this is a decent follow-up to the last Zammuto LP. It's a nice sister album. I'm kind of hoping that Nick's next full-length will have a few more surprises in it, and maybe it's just the time of year that isn't really totally vibing with me on this record. This could most definitely be your perfect winter album several months from now. Maybe a wintry mood is what I really need to get into this album, but as of right now, even though there are quite a few tracks that I like, it's the sort of abrupt endings and the handful of very forgettable, unengaging soundscape-like tracks that have left me just somewhat on the fence with this thing. I'm feeling a light to decent 6 on this LP. Transition, if you've given this album a listen, what did you think of it? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Why? What do you think I should review next? And that is it. Anthony Fantano, Zammuto, forever.